we had a number of questions about the various situations that entities may find themselves in with respect to the New York pause. So just to try and make it crystal clear, the governor has put executive orders in place that have put forth a pause for New York. Essential businesses defined by those executive orders can continue operations to the extent necessary. Those businesses are supposed to be operating remotely to the extent they can, but in-person operations are not restricted if they meet the definition of essential business. And the Empire State Development Corporation has provided guidance as to what that might be and a process if you're unsure whether you're an essential business. So a lot of people have been operating under that rubric. That brings us to the second category of businesses, those that have been shut down by the pause. At least their in-person operations are not ongoing, and they're very interested in the unpause New York approach that the governor's been talking about, and that we will now be seeing by region throughout New York on a phased approach. And so to the extent that you are not allowed to operate in person, you'll be looking at this phased approach by region, and there will be a varying reopening for those businesses and employers over time, with evaluation of whether the metrics continue to be met. But there's also a third group, and that's the government and municipal employers who, frankly, were never fully shut down. And Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about where we are with that?
Sure, Pete. Thanks. Where we are with respect to the public sector employees and the municipal workers is really very much where we always have been, at least since the middle of March. It's we take it all the way back to the workforce or the personnel restrictions that were put into place by Executive Order 202.4, and that limited the amount of individuals, that limited the types of individuals, essential and non-essential, that could be present and working for municipal entities, for public sector entities. Those groups were not stopped. We continued to work since then. We've continued to work up through today, and we'll continue to do so. So, as a third category for all you municipal employers out there, look at it and say, I've been subject to my 50% restriction that was set forth in Executive Order 202.4. I continue to be. I was not subject to the New York on pause in the Executive Orders 2026 and 2027 and 2028. And then consequently, when I'm now looking at and hearing a lot about reopening, I'm not reopening. I have been open. I've continued to be open. I'm running at a little bit less than optimum capacity, but I've been doing a lot of the things that is the very nature of my business, and providing sanitation and providing police and providing fire. And eventually we will get back to the full complement and the full workforce group, but that's not going to happen before June 7th. It may come in at some future point, but it's certainly not something that's wedded to the phases and the regions that are in place and that have been talked about today in the news, yesterday in the news. And it's really remains to be seen how we will get everybody back to work in the public sector.
Yeah, and it's a great point, because it's possible that a similar approach could be adopted, on a regional and phased basis, or something different. We can't say for certain, but I think there has been confusion created because when people are thinking about ramping back up, all businesses and employers where things have been ramped down are naturally thinking about, those are things that may apply to me. I would also say that
it's really a return, right? I mean, it's really
right.
A return to work. It's not so much a reopening in those contexts, but it's getting a return to what we used to do, and the having the full complement of the workforce back.
Yeah, and some of the best practices that have been evolving would probably apply to all groups, those who are currently operating either at 50% in the public sector context or as an essential business. And as we phase in, having plans in place, monitoring the evolving guidance and, making changes as necessary. So I think we can learn a lot from
Hmm.
the various approaches, even to the extent we've still been operating. Second question that I think we wanted to talk a little bit about is, kind of the bargaining obligation for those employers that have unions in the workplace. And I guess I would start with the premise that everybody needs to really examine their collective bargaining agreement and see where they are. To the extent we've got provisions today that already address some of these questions, then the bargaining obligation may already have been discharged and you're in the position where you just follow your contract language. To the extent that you haven't, then you'd have to evaluate, what your baseline legal obligations are and whether you've got bargaining obligations. I think you had some thoughts on, how that might play out as a practical matter.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think a key piece of the return to work is going to be shift work and spacing out employees, not just physically within desk space, but also spacing them out temporally, right, across the day, and not having everybody present on hand at one time, but more across a longer workday. Your contract language is going to be critical for that. So if you have contract language that is very rigid, that provides very strict work hours or a work week for your employees, you may have less flexibility than a contract provision that has, must work any 8 consecutive hours or some example like that. That might give you more room to space out your force. Even if you have not been doing it to date, you can say, well, look, pursuant to the moving forward plan, this is something that's the right thing to do for public health, for employee health. We have the flexibility to do it. We're going to implement it and do it now. We have that contractual room to do so, and we're going to put it in place. We'll give you some minimal notice in this instance because of the circumstances, but we'll see how it goes from there. And whether you return to the original shifts, that's going to be a question for down the road. But I think with that piece being a key aspect of the governor's plan for coming back to work, I think we'll see a lot of issues in that space.
Yeah, so 3 key concepts here that I think we want to leave everybody with. One is, and you mentioned it, Chris, it's notice, right? That, whatever you do, it's a good idea to make sure that your employees and their bargaining representative know what's going on and have a good idea of what you're doing and why. That's, I think, good labor relations, and it's a good practice. The second concept is decisional bargaining, and I think that's where we're talking about, has it already been bargained? Is it in your contract? Be sure to check and see what the CBA says, because there's a good chance that you've already got language, and then you'd be looking at, okay, what does it mean? How does it apply to this situation? And then the third is, the concept of impact bargaining. And even if the decision has already been bargained, or the contract contains those rights, sometimes there is what they call an impact bargaining obligation, where the parties would need to sit down and talk about the impact of the implementation of the decision. So some things to keep on your radar as you navigate this evolving situation. So I think that's it for the webinar follow-up today. Thanks everybody for being with us. Thanks for all your support as clients and friends, and stay safe out there.